Greetings, everyone. Rob Chassner, continuing in our series of introduction to the books of the Bible, and this will be on the introduction to the book of Exodus, the second book in the Bible, in the Old Testament. There's a real close connection between the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus. In fact, there's a pretty smooth transition. If we were to read the last verses in Genesis, and then continue to read on in Exodus, in the first couple of verses, you can see very clearly that there's a smooth transition. In Genesis 50, the last verse 26 says, "So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt." And then in Exodus chapter 1, it starts out giving all the names of the sons of Israel, or the sons of Joseph, of Jacob. And then it says Joseph was already in Egypt. So we can see the transition between Genesis and Exodus, and that that Israel was already in Egypt. God sent the Jews to Egypt, and Egypt, for the most part, was a really good experience. You know, we recognize that the Jews were thrown into cruel bondage for about 120 years, and they were slaves in Egypt. But, you know, for almost 300 years, because the Jews were in Egypt for almost 400 years. So for almost 300 years, there was a lot of blessings and prosperity going on for the Jews in Egypt. And likely one of the reasons the Jews were thrown into bondage is because they were not in too much of a hurry to leave Egypt. If you're living in a prosperous life, if you have a blessed life, there's no real hurry to change or to leave. And so the Lord sends some rough times in their way, and that was what they needed in order to get the Jews out of Egypt. Years ago, an author named Francis Schaeffer wrote a book entitled "He is There and He is Not Silent," of course, He being God. The premise of the book is God is real, God is always speaking. Now, many of us who know God have not heard God speaking to us clearly about what it is that He wants to do in our lives. And oftentimes we cry out to God and ask, "Why won't you speak to me?" We know that God is always there. We know that God doesn't always connect with you or me in the form of hearing Him communicate or speak to us, but we know that God is always there. And God has at work, is at work in our lives, and He was at work in the lives of the Jews when they were there in Egypt, while they were in bondage through the adversity that they were going through. And it's likely that God would have told them what He was doing. God would have communicated with them, but it's not likely these people would have believed God. You know, they're thinking, think about this. Hey guys, this would be God speaking. I'm going to have a little baby out of the tribe of Levi. And we're likely thinking, Levi, the last time, God did something out of the tribe of Levi was with Simeon, and they were not blessed, but they were rather cursed, and they were divided and scattered. You can't use anybody out of the tribe of Levi. But then, God is going to place that baby from Levi into Pharaoh's house, and Pharaoh's going to subsidize the deliverer. And after 40 years of that, I'm going to follow. I'm going to have him going to have you follow him as his sheep for another 40 years, and then he's going to come back into Egypt with a great big stick, and he's going to use that stick to deliver my people. Well, if God told you that and you were one of these Jews back in that period of time, it's not likely that you would have believed that story, even though it was God telling you that. You'd have to wonder, how often does God speak into our lives and that we just don't listen, or that why he doesn't speak into our lives, because it's likely that you and I would not believe him. All right, so that's a little bit of an introduction to Exodus. Um, and we're going to move on, but we'll have a separate and distinct video covering verse by verse through the book of Exodus. Thank you. I hope this has been helpful and informative, and thank you for watching.